This week on the video version of the Business of Tech, cloud marketplace and digital transformation growth numbers, a DOJ and Equal Opportunity Employment Commission AI warning, several new tech regulation laws as public sentiment shifts, Microsoft's sustainability efforts, do customers care, Costa Rica declares war on Conti, and Apple's new training courses. All this and more. Hit those like and subscribe buttons and help us pay the bills. And here are this week's stories. Bessemer Venture Partners released their State of the Cloud 2022 report. Here are some highlights. For every dollar a SaaS business spends on its sales team, the company will see $1 of recurring revenue materialize in less than a year and grow nearly perpetually. Cloud marketplaces are still nascent, but in 2021, Bessemer saw marketplace transactions grow an estimated 70% to $4 billion, which is 3 times faster than the public cloud growth. The report also focused on more local clouds, localization to a market or a region. Finally, the report focused on the measure of an exceptional startup as a centaur, a business that reaches $100 million of annual recurring revenue, or ARR. IDC released an update to the DC Worldwide Digital Transformation Spending Guide, forecasting global spending on the digital transformation of business practices, products, and organizations to reach $1.8 trillion in 2022, an increase of 17.6% over 2021. IDC identified the U.S. as the largest geographic market for DX spending in 2022, accounting for nearly 35% of the worldwide total. Western Europe will be the second largest region for DX spending, followed closely by China. Why do we care? Most IT services companies are not striving to be a unicorn or a centaur. I remain bullish on old school ideas such as entrepreneurs building viable local small businesses that serve their customers, employees, and own personal needs. That said, it's a pivotal skill to understand the financial incentives and the goals of the technology vendors those services are built upon. Cloud marketplaces are still nascent. Well, $4 billion is still a pretty significant number. The partners think there's something there, and that's not to be ignored. Then again, digital transformation in the trillions. That's the mainstream space. Cloud marketplaces are the coming one, digital transformation the already here and growing one. New guidance from the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission and the U.S. Department of Justice warns employers that they could be breaching the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, if they use AI-based software designed to shortlist candidates that fail to create an equitable experience for job seekers with disabilities. Quoting further from Forbes, employers are reminded that, even if they elect to deploy software using algorithms wholly designed by specialist third-party providers, they could be acting unlawfully should the platform disadvantage candidates with disabilities. This can occur due to the software itself being inaccessible or discriminatory in how traits are evaluated and scored. If the employer fails to recognize this and act by providing reasonable accommodations, they could be breaking the law. Several practical examples of how AI algorithmic hiring tools can create unequal experiences for candidates with disabilities are laid out. These might include the use of timed or gamified tests that are inaccessible to candidates with motor or visual impairments as a result of it being difficult for them to use a mouse or view the screen, particularly when having to operate at speed. Another example may be video analysis software that measures facial expressions or speech patterns. Such software is likely to automatically mark down an individual on the autism spectrum who may possess a non-standard eye gaze or someone with a mild speech impediment. Why do we care? Here's a key insight of the day. The AI may be causing organizations to break the law. This is exactly the space I think has value. not just for evaluating technology for its own sake, but understanding these implications and helping to navigate them. Which AI approaches handle these legal requirements? Answer that question, and it's more valuable than simply implementing a system. And note the other portion of this insight. The end customer does not abdicate away their legal obligations. That's a key understanding of the risks, and again, providers need to be communicative with their customers over system risks. If a customer doesn't understand that, there's a round 2 on those lawsuits. Research at a collection of cybersecurity firms and authorities in the US, UK, and Australia was recently updated by researchers with SecureWorks Counter Threat Unit to provide insights on attacks on an unnamed US philanthropic organization in January 2022 and an unnamed local US government in March 2022. Quoting Cyberscoop, "The two incidents represent distinct clusters of activity within the Cobalt Mirage group. The researchers concluded that one focused on opportunistic ransomware attacks for financial gain, and the other worked on targeted intrusions seeking access and intelligence collection. In conclusion, the well-known Iranian hacking organization focuses heavily on financial attacks." REvil 2 is getting more research. They're re-emerging yet again, based on research from the same SecureWorks team. Microsoft is warning about a new variant of sysrv, which it calls sysrv-K, scanning the internet for WordPress plugins with older vulnerabilities, and a recently disclosed remote code execution flaw in the Spring Cloud Gateway software. The goal? To install cryptocurrency mining malware on Linux and Windows systems. Researchers from the Technical University of Darmstadt in Germany have released details about an exploit for iPhones when they're off, because specific wireless chips remain on, including one for Bluetooth. The researchers said in their paper that they were able to show that it's possible to install malware on the Bluetooth chip. It's important to note that this research is primarily theoretical, and there's no evidence that this kind of attack has been used in the wild. Also, as the researchers point out in the paper, hackers would need to first hack and jailbreak the iPhone to be able to access the Bluetooth chip and exploit it, potentially making it a bit redundant in most cases. The researchers note that the low-power mode implementation is a net positive, as it allows users to find lost or stolen phones, even off. Their key finding is the new threat model. Why do we care? My takeaway continues to be that the themes are consistent. Cybercrime is about financial gain. We could go down the rabbit hole of nation-state actors. We won't, because the practical advice there is simply that governments need to handle that. Feel strongly about nation-state protection? Vote for politicians who will fund it. For providers and their customers, the motivating factor to consider is the financial gains of the attacker. Again, vote for politicians who will handle the proper sanctions, but then take mitigation steps to prevent the damage. Yeah, the usual recommendations about two-factor authentication and backups. But more importantly, build security approaches that assume breach and minimize the gains to be had. That includes being prepared not to pay ransoms. The House on Monday passed easily, 386 to 31, a pair of cybersecurity measures. One requires DDHS to review its incident response plans and submit a report outlining the specific roles of federal agencies. More should come tomorrow, as they review an already Senate-approved one, dubbed the State and Local Government Cybersecurity Act, allowing the federal government to conduct cybersecurity exercises with state and local entities and provide them access to technical tools and other assistance. It would also let federal officials coordinate with state, local, and tribal and territorial entities to establish vulnerability disclosure programs, information sharing efforts, and improvements to election security infrastructure. They will also review the Cybersecurity Grants for Schools Act of 2022, which would allocate federal grants to state governments to provide a more robust cybersecurity curriculum to students. They're happening at the local level too. Maryland signed 3 into law last week, funding new tech purchases and staff positions and solidifying its cyber policy structure. Meanwhile, public sentiment on tech regulation has changed per Pew Research. Overall, 44% of Americans think big tech companies should be regulated more than they did, down from 56% in April 2021. Conversely, the share of Americans who say they want less government regulation of big tech companies has roughly doubled from about 1 in 10 in previous years to 1 in 5 now. A plurality of Americans do believe in greater regulation overall. This, of course, as Senator Michael Bennet introduced the Digital Platform Commission Act, which is legislation to establish a new 5-person commission responsible for protecting consumers in the age of big tech. According to the bill, viewed exclusively by the Washington Post, the agency would have the power to interrogate the algorithms powering big tech platforms and set new rules to ensure the biggest companies are transparent about how they handle complex decisions around content moderation on their platforms. Reuters is reporting on the shift in sentiment around facial recognition. It's making a comeback. Attributed to the rising crime and increasing lobbying from developers, Virginia is eliminating its ban in July, a year after approving it. California and the city of New Orleans are considering it next month. From 2019 through 2021, about 24 U.S. state or local governments passed bans. New research from NIST shows significant progress in accuracy, and Homeland Security published a report last month finding little variation in accuracy across skin tone and gender. Why do we care? When facts change, so should actions. There's a difference between sentiment, aka surveys, and research. The points around facial recognition are changing, and so the approach to the technology should be measured. Public sentiment on regulation is also changing, and yet I'm left noting it's still a negative factor for services companies. The regulation is coming. The question will be how much, not if it happens at all. A shift in sentiment might mean less regulation, but it doesn't mean zero. And I'd be remiss if I didn't note how a privacy law in general would frame both conversations. Microsoft is making its Cloud for Sustainability, a SaaS solution that organizations can use to report, record, and reduce emissions across their enterprise, generally available on June 1st. There's a similar one too, the Emissions Impact Dashboard, out for Azure, and the company has previously announced a version of this for Microsoft 365. Why do we care? So listeners, the question is, do customers really care about sustainability? I'll admit my bias here. I thought green IT would take off over a decade ago, and I was very wrong. So am I gun shy, or is this a demand from customers? And does it change based on customer size? I don't have the answers here, and in fact, would very much like to hear from listeners on this one. A little less return to work, a little more work landscape today. Microsoft is reportedly doubling its global budget for merit-based salary increases and increasing its range for annual stock-based compensation by at least 25% for employees at the senior director level and below. This is after Amazon doubled its maximum base pay range earlier, as well as granting more RSUs, or restricted stock units, to employees. Business Insider reports on the unsustainable nature of tech industry compensation. I'm quoting the piece. Snap, Pinterest, Wayfair, Uber, and DoorDash doubled or even tripled the number of RSUs granted during the same timeframe. Roku's RSU grants surged in the first quarter, up more than 3,000% from a year earlier. It's completely unsustainable, said a managing director at Pearl Meyer, who advises companies on compensation plans. It's really affecting some of the smaller companies, but even some of the larger companies, because there always seems to be someone larger or willing to go deeper. Meanwhile, a new survey of employers indicates the change to work is happening. They plan to allow an average of 2.3 days per week at home, up from about 1.5 a week in summer 2020. The Wall Street Journal gets into the game too, reviewing the tension between workers and employers. One story, the resignation of Ian Goodfellow, a director of machine learning at Apple, in part over the return to work policy of the company. Further noted how competitors are using it as a recruiting tool. And just on cue, Apple is slowing its hybrid return to the office. As reported by The Verge, a memo to employees states that, quote, "We are extending the phase-in period of the pilot and maintaining 2 days a week in the office for the time being." For those who are in the current 2-day-per-week pilot, Apple said that if they feel uncomfortable coming into the office, they will again have the option to work remotely. Additionally, the company is enforcing mask mandates within some stores and office settings as COVID cases surge. To give some context to the landscape, Microsoft, in its 2022 Work Index Trend Report, found that 43% of employees are somewhat or extremely likely to consider changing jobs in the coming year, up from 41% in 2021. Also, 52% of Gen Z and millennials might change jobs this year, up by 3% in 2021. IDC found that about 30% of employees who work under a hybrid arrangement aren't satisfied with their employer's technology. A survey of 1,000 UK knowledge workers by messaging platform Slack found that just over a third, 37%, felt anxious or stressed about returning to the office. Half of the group, 49%, cited the potential impact on their work-life balance as their leading cause of concern. Another 49% highlighted apprehension over the associated costs of working from an office, such as travel and food expenses. A recent study of U.S. office workers conducted by Citrix found that 92% of employees are concerned about the rising cost of commuting, with 57% of employees wishing to work from home to avoid these expenses. Now, why do we care? Nothing like a good market correction, a pandemic shift, and new technology to uproot everything, huh? Savvy employers know they shouldn't spend any time fighting their employees when the market is tight. I don't buy into the noise I've been hearing about the market being down, causing the shift of power back to employers. And that's because most employers are running focused on basics businesses. If you run a business that needs to make a profit, not just grow, then you're not trimming. We see corrections because compensation is still required to bring in talent and retain it, and combine that with the power employees have over where they work. You have to make a deliberate set of investments here, and helping clients with that, well over and above the technology stack, is where the real value is. Linode, a top infrastructure as a service provider, has resources specifically for helping MSPs explore the alternative cloud. Discover this growing market, one of the best kept secrets in building a scalable, thriving, modern managed services provider business. Learn about the cloud provider landscape, improving KPIs, security, and more in Linode's free ebook, The MSP's Guide to Modern Cloud Infrastructure, available now. This resource and more at linode.com/MSP Radio. And from the I didn't want to miss it file, Protocol reviewed cloud insurance. What's that? Well, it's what you think. Insurance to compensate policyholders for their or customers' financial losses when their cloud providers have a service disruption. One such company is Parametrics, which developed a cloud monitoring system and offers insurance against 18 AWS services, 13 Azure ones, 15 Google Cloud services, and some Oracle Cloud ones. Why do we care? I didn't know about cloud insurance until this, but it makes perfect sense. Can't be alone in not knowing about it. Beyond learning about it, understanding customers' risk profiles and analyzing their needs is that sweet spot we're looking for. There's a solid argument for cloud plus insurance as a much more robust way to ensure continuity. It's a clever idea. Here's a new one on the ransomware front. The Conti gang has hacked the Costa Rican government and encourages citizens to protest their government's non-payment of a ransom and says they should overthrow the government if it doesn't pay up. This after the state of emergency declared last week, and now a set of taunts posted on the weekend. Pulling from Vice, Conti is primarily a community of people who understand information security, and we believe that we understand it very well, the hackers wrote, asking the Costa Rican government to pay the ransom so that their problems will go away. Quote, why not just buy a decryption key? The hackers also added that they will delete the decryption keys, a threat that essentially means it won't be possible for Costa Rica to unlock the files encrypted by the ransomware. The story continues as the Costa Rican president, who just began his term this month, has declared that the country is at war with the gang. Quote, "The war is against an international terrorist group which apparently has operatives in Costa Rica. There are very clear indications that people inside the country are collaborating with Conti." Meanwhile, in Veeam's 2022 Ransomware Trends Report, 4 key data points. 72% of organizations that had partial or complete attacks on their backup repositories. 80% of successful attacks targeted known vulnerabilities. 76% of victims paid the ransom, and 24% of organizations that paid did not recover their stolen data. Why do we care? Do not pay the ransom. A simple, powerful statement that requires a lot of preparation. In order to tell the criminals to F off, an organization has to be in position to do so. Confident in their recovery, executing a plan, prepared before the incident. I've talked about the idea of cyber as warfare before, and note that NATO has linked cyber to defense as well. Imagine for a moment if Costa Rica was in NATO, and now the consequences of a declaration of war. These are the cyber stakes. On Tuesday, Google announced a new program around open source software and their attempt to secure the supply chain. The new program, Assured Open Source Software, curates and distributes a security-vetted collection of open source packages to Google Cloud customers. Per The Verge, a list of the 550 major open source libraries being continuously reviewed by Google is available on GitHub. While these libraries can all be downloaded independently of Google, the Assured OSS program will see audited versions distributed through Google Cloud, mitigating against incidents where developers intentionally or unintentionally corrupt widely used open source libraries. The service is in early access mode and is expected to be made available for broader customer testing in Q3 2022. While I'm covering Google Cloud, TD SYNNEX has announced the availability of Google Cloud solutions within its portfolio. Now, why do we care? Google Cloud, available within traditional distribution channels, is a notable development and shows the mainstream nature of the technology. A technology, mind you, that is rapidly maturing. I wouldn't cite this Google program as the perfect solution, but perhaps a solid middle ground for those asking for a software bill of materials. What if software was built only on security-vetted packages? It would, undoubtedly, make the foundation have a smaller attack surface. Some savvy teams will be asking questions about how to get to this state. In super tactical and handy news, Apple announced it had updated its certification and training for IT pros and management working with Apple products. That includes 2 specific courses being added online: Apple Device Support and Apple Deployment and Management. The company noted the training is redesigned and now entirely online and self-paced. Courses are built upon each other, starting with Apple Device Support and moving on to Apple Deployment and Management. Each course is $149. Why do we care? It's been my experience that many IT service providers view the ever-growing Mac market as an afterthought. I'd argue now that there's little excuse for a $149 course to be taken to be professionalized. A joint advisory from agencies in the US, Canada, New Zealand, the Netherlands, and the UK revealed the top 10 attack vectors exploited by threat actors breaching networks. Here's that list. Multi-factor authentication not enforced. MFA, particularly from remote desktop access, can help prevent account takeovers. Incorrectly applied privileges or permissions and errors within access control lists. These mistakes can prevent the enforcement of access control rules and could allow unauthorized users or system processes to be granted access to objects. Software not being up to date. Unpatched software may allow an attacker to exploit publicly known vulnerabilities to gain access to sensitive information, launch a denial of service attack, or take control of a system. Use of vendor-supplied default configurations or default login usernames and passwords. Many software and hardware products come out of the box with overly permissive factory default configurations intended to make the products user-friendly and reduce the troubleshooting time for customer service. Remote services, such as VPNs, lack sufficient controls to prevent unauthorized access. In recent years, malicious threat actors have been observed targeting remote services. Strong password policies not being enforced. Malicious cyber actors can use a myriad of methods to exploit weak, leak, or compromise passwords and gain unauthorized access to victims' systems. Cloud services are unprotected. Misconfigured cloud services are common targets for cyber actors. Poor configurations can allow for sensitive data theft and even cryptojacking. Open ports and misconfigured services exposed on the internet. This is one of the most common vulnerability findings. Cyber actors use scanning tools to detect open ports and use them as an initial attack vector. Failure to detect or block phishing attempts. Cyber actors send emails with malicious macros, primarily in Microsoft Word documents or Excel files, to infect computer systems. And finally, poor endpoint detection and response. Cyber actors use obfuscated malicious scripts and PowerShell attacks to bypass endpoint security controls and launch attacks on target devices. Now, why do we care? This is essentially your checklist for did I do the basics? Nothing here is new. We only care because of the source of the publication, government agencies. Simply a matter of time until this checklist becomes the complete list of enforceable requirements for both insurance coverage and what savvy lawyers ask when customers seek damages. Monday, Microsoft's head of channel sales announced he is leaving, and leaving the company. Rodney Clark was named channel chief in March 2021, and the company has indicated it plans to have a new chief in place by the start of its fiscal year, July 1. And while I'm on Microsoft, the company announced changes to its licensing policies in Europe, quoting Mary Jo Foley at ZDNet. Microsoft outlined 5 European cloud principles. The real meat, though, is in the planned changes aimed at leveling the playing field for European cloud providers when it comes to running Microsoft on-premises software like Windows, Windows Server, SQL Server, and Office on their own infrastructure. The blog said Microsoft will provide European cloud providers with assistance in enabling Microsoft on-premises software to run on their cloud infrastructure. This expansion of terms will cover Windows, Office, and Microsoft 365 apps for business and enterprise. Microsoft also will make it, quote, easier than ever to license Windows Server for virtual environments by relaxing the licensing rules that reflected legacy software licensing practices where licenses are tied to physical hardware. Why do we care? I only noted the channel chief change due to the wider nature of the coverage that speaks to Microsoft's power in the market. And now, Europe's legislative power too. How does it feel, American companies, to know your European counterparts get better terms because of the regulations there? That's why we care about regulation in the US, and European listeners are interested in the new terms they get. Thanks for your time and attention. Time is a finite resource, and I really value you giving me some of yours. If you like this video, you can let me know with a like of the video, and even more valuable, hitting the subscription button. My content is all free, and I use metrics like subscriptions to pay the bills, so it has real value. The content here is produced under ethics guidelines posted at businessof.tech. If you're interested in more content like this, you can get access to content early via our Patreon at patreon.com/MSPradio. It's our give what you want model where you set the value of what you think the content is worth. If you like this podcast, you can catch it daily as the 5-minute news and commentary show, The Business of Tech, available on all your favorite podcatchers with links at businessof.tech. Just hit that big blue button to subscribe. Again, thank you for taking time out of your day to listen, and I really value the interaction. If you want to say something in the comments, I do respond and watch all that, and and I look forward to talking to you next time.